very good evening to everyone. Thank you for joining. And thank you to all the speakers for taking the time out to have a conversation on something, I guess, which is very relevant, as is evident by the 400 plus registrations that we got for this webinar. Also, speaking to several experts, speaking to leadership, management, implementation teams, I think there is a consensus that learning and development is the need of the hour, and we need to capacitate organizations to be more resilient, and of course, people across the cadre of the social sector. Without much, taking too much time, I'd just like to briefly talk about the study that Fourth Wheel is doing with A.T.E. Chandra. We set out about 3 months ago to trace the impact that learning and development programs have had at a professional level for individuals, how that's then translated into impacts at organizational levels, and most importantly, what does this mean for our sector? Another thing that we are trying to look at through the study is to look at a framework. What do we mean by a successful learning and development program? And most importantly, what does the future hold? How should we be designing L&D programs? How should we be incentivizing it, making it, more adopted, and, for the social sector to actually be more involved in these kind of programs? Broadly, I'd like to introduce our speakers as well. We have Priya from Antarang Foundation, who represents the NGO voice with us today. We have Kavneet from Dasra and Kashyap from Bridgespan, who offer these learning and development programs and have several insights to share on how these are designed, what successful programs look like. And of course, Gayatri from A.T.E. Chandra, who represents the donor perspective, who have been supporting and trying to institutionalize these programs within organizations. So very excited to have all four of them with us today. And yes, would like to start with Priya to talk us through what in her experience learning and development has impacted at these three levels. And then Priya, if you could also dive a little bit, once you talk about impacts and successes, what do you think the gaps are in the sector today? So over to you, Priya.
Thank you, Sharon. Thanks. And it's a pleasure to be here among so many friends. And thank you for doing this very important study. As always, A.T. Chandra and Gayatri take the lead in doing so many things that are so crucial for building the ecosystem in the sector. So thanks for that. So I can talk about, I'll just to sort of talk about learning and development programs. And maybe I can start with, sort of this caveat that L&D is not just your structured programs, workshops, initiatives that the ecosystem is doing, right? So I think for us, it's at least at Antarang and the other organizations that I've led, I've realized that it could also be opportunities that organizations sort of create for themselves within the organization itself, right? That's like sort of the first one. And then I'll dive into the impact. Personally, for me as a leader and for leadership in the sector, I do believe that a lot of these initiatives have been super valuable. There's no real playbook for leadership in the social sector, at least, if you think about 2 decades ago when most of us sort of started out, or 2.5 decades ago, and that was like the high point of the sector. From then till today, there's really there's not been a playbook for leadership over here. So I think it's been really, really crucial that programs like the DSI LP that I've been a part of, and many such initiatives where I've been like sort of the inaugural cohort of a lot of these initiatives, whether it was Unlimited's the accelerator program, much earlier than that, when you're nominated as an Ashoka Fellow, so the kind of opportunities that come across, it really gives you the opportunity to define your style as a leader, right? And what is the playbook that you can follow? What are some of the rules, so to speak, that you could follow? That's the first thing. And as the sector also evolved, and especially post-COVID, I think also the impact of some of these initiatives just on well-being of the leader and, resilience, cultivating resilience of the leader has been one of the biggest impact that I've seen and I've personally experienced, and really feeling a little bit more integrated, because the work does burn you out, all said and done, right? So I think that was something that's one of the biggest impact that I've seen. And obviously that sort of filters down to the organization and to what we are at Antarang as well, right? For the organization, one of the key impact that we've seen as a very young organization, with our managerial team also being very young, and the managerial team managing a team that's also very young, it can be quite intimidating, right? So again, two types of initiatives that Antarang has been a part of. One is, a lot of the team members have been part of very structured, thematic, technical skills building, right? And that's been, again, super valuable, because we have really tiny L&D budgets in the sector. So unless we have some of these opportunities that keep coming, whether they're starting from webinars to mentoring to workshops and then larger annual programs that are there, I think that's really built the skill set for people there. So it is here that what I spoke about, the more organizational level kind of programs have been really useful, right? Which is more things like, we have task forces, we have working groups, so that people from across verticals can take part in one activity and learn skills that work across the board as well, right? So that's been one sort of huge impact, that those kind of more unstructured, I would say, but organic level activities or L&D initiatives that we've undertaken. The third is really in the whole bucket of building managerial ability and just building core sort of leadership skills amongst the team as well. And there we've seen a big uptick thanks to programs like this. Finally, I would say the biggest impact that is very, very valuable is just this peer group. And I see so many friends here. And Kavneet, for example, has been part of some of the L&D programs that I've been with for a long, long time, going back almost a decade and a half, right? The peer group and the peer support that this forms over here has been very, very critical. And that has been like the bedrock for organization, I would say, definitely for Antarang. And I hear many of my friends saying that that's been one of the biggest impact for us because of these L&D initiatives.
Sure. Yes, and definitely, Priya. And there was this one line that you said, which, and a lot of people have mentioned as leadership. You don't feel that alone, right? When you're part of a peer group, when you're kind of putting in structures and probably discussing, what's working, what's not. So thank you for that. And Priya, do you want to talk a little bit about the gaps that you still feel that we need to build capacities on? The sector as a whole, whose capacity should we be building? Could you please touch upon that as well?
Sure. I see the gaps that, Gayatri is here, and so is Kavneet, and we've discussed this quite a bit at many forums and many sort of opportunities, evenings over a drink and a meal as well, right? First is just this, this one, I would say, pet peeve that I have is that in some ways, the kind of opportunities that founders or the CXOs in this sector get, it almost makes one feel overcapacitated, if there is a word like that, right? The frontline leadership or the top leadership to be overcapacitated, because most of these programs are for CXOs and for the founders, right? And the second line is often ignored. Thankfully, Kavneet and Dasra this time, they've done the whole ILP, DSLIP for the second line, and which I feel was a huge gap that was there. And I feel this is like a very critical issue, and it's been a pet peeve because, ironically, we are all about equity in the world, and then when you overcapacitate the top line leadership and then sort of ignore the rest of the organization, you're actually building more inequity in many ways. So I would say that's been one of the biggest gaps so far. The second is also in many ways, I feel the kind of L&D opportunities that are there today are towards, obviously, I mean, for all of us, issues like human resources, building culture in the organization, say finance, or fundraising for sure, or even communications. These are very critical, and that's important. And it's been great that we've had many opportunities, even M&E and stuff like that. But ultimately, what I feel is still missing in, at least the I worked only in 3 large organizations. I mean, the 2 large organizations, and now it's Antarang. What I found missing is really this whole narrative building skills, right? The ability to sort of connect the dots of various ideas and actually frame that into a very clear narrative. It's not communication. It's not it's not sort of clear cut, I would say, building a strategy, but it's in this, how do I frame a coherent narrative and write well? So it's almost like that, right? Like this coherence, I feel that's a gap. I'm not sure whether I'm articulating that very clearly, but that's like any sort of public facing content. How do you sort of build this very clear narrative? I feel that's been a gap. And I'll talk about one more very tactical skill. That's one of budgeting, right? Finance and reporting and sort of donor engagement, that's a very different area. But budgeting is essentially converting your strategy into a ask, right? And that requires a lot of strategic thinking and strategic conversion. And what happens in most of our organizations is that budgeting is mostly led by finance folks who think like accountants, right? Whereas this is a organizational strategy. So how do you convert that into a budget? I feel is something that we've struggled with, and I found there have been no workshops or no sort of L&D initiatives that bridge this gap. Finally, I'll talk about 2 things. One, I feel we copy paste a lot of the ideas from the corporate world into this, right? It's almost like a force fitting of what happens in the corporate world over here. Of course, most concepts are transferable, and we do learn from that. It's great that SNMI, that A.T.E. Chandra has launched in India as well, sort of gave us the opportunity to also delve into case studies, which and forms of analogous learning that also involve the social sector. But how about bringing the not-for-profit sector leaders along with donors and the funding community as well? Ultimately, we are one big ecosystem, right? Bringing us together and learning from one another, or sort of learning, having the funding community and even corporate India, I would say, from practices in the social sector. I mean, which other sector can do so much work and bring about so much change with resources that are so tight? I mean, clearly we do some things right, as a sector. So can we expand that and have this gap filled, where we're all sort of getting together, and it becomes very normal to learn both ways, right? And not just have corporate sector examples, but also have social sector examples for corporate India, whether it is for the donor community or just for corporate India as a whole. And I feel that's been a gap.
That's amazing. Thank you, Priya. I just want to quickly summarize. There's been a lot of people joining, and I don't want to miss out on these things. And then I think it flows very nicely into my questions for Kashyap. But just to summarize, it's not just a focus or of overcapacitating leaders, but how do you look at second line leadership, others in your organization who are playing equally important roles? I remember, Priya, many years ago, I don't know if you remember this, is you always said, let's not just present data, but ask the so what question. And so, how do you present better narratives to the data, not just reporting what you find? So, very relevant. Also, we'll feed into what Kashyap said, budgeting. Like, you need a good strategy to then detail out your ask and link it to fundraising. So, how do you how do we build capacities on that? And most importantly, and I'm sure Gayatri is going to be talking about this, can we break the silos of donors and implementing not for profits, right? And how do we do that? Because then capacities are being built across the sector with similar sort of ideas and thought processes. So thank you for that, Priya. And Kashyap, over to you. You have been, Bridgespan has been looking at to tackle some of these issues that Priya said, right? So I'd like you to talk to the audience about two things. One is, how did you design, or how do you design your programs? And in your words, what are the secret, ingredients to really make these things work, right? So it would be great if you could take both those questions.
Yeah. And also, Sharon, would you like me to share a bit on how do we assess the learning gaps as well? If that
Yes, absolutely.
Great. So let me just spend a couple of minutes on how do we assess the learning gaps and then move on to the design part of it. First of all, it's exciting to be amongst the peer group, right? And then thanks for organizing this. Really, really appreciate. And thanks to ATCF for bringing this topic under the spotlight, which it deserves, right? Sometimes I think it's just and I always say that it's something which is very important but not urgent, and therefore only the urgent gets the spotlight and not something which is important. So thank you for doing this. In terms of how do we assess the gaps, I think so. One is, of course, conducting extensive surveys. Over the last 5-6 years, we have conducted surveys with almost 2,500 to 3,000 nonprofits at different point in times, right? And where it starts with some of the open-ended questions saying, what are your needs and how can someone support you, right? It starts with as wide as that and going into specifics. What is interesting is in those surveys year on year, the answers are quite consistent, right? The top 5, 6 needs are: number one is generally fundraising without a doubt. Number two would be talent. Sometimes if the season is, then regulatory cholesterol and regulation and all of that. Number three is talent. Talent and M&E again keep on switching places. Number three is strategy. Number four is M&E. And number five is a lot of times comps, right? So this list is not stop surprising us in some ways, right? And it collaborates with what we hear in the market. But what is interesting is when you double click on fundraising, right? Or ask this question of why you are not able to fundraise or what within fundraising, then so then what we are seeing is that am I muted? Oh, sorry.
Yes, I'm so sorry. I muted everyone. Yeah, sorry about that, Kashyap. Yeah.
Okay. In fundraising, while it's number one almost all the times, what is interesting is when we double click on what help within fundraising or why you're not able to fundraise, almost 60 to 70% of the time the answer is that we don't have a clear strategy and therefore we are not able to fundraise. And when we collaborate that with funders, right, saying we ask them this question that, okay, maybe you hear maybe 10 pitches a month or perhaps more or less, but why do you say no to things? And 85 to 90% of the time they say we say no because we couldn't understand their strategy. We thought they were just doing too many things, or we thought they were not able to articulate their strategy. So it's only 20% of the reasons which are technical, which is in terms of, okay, I need to be aware of new funders. Okay, I don't know how to do a pitch. Okay, I don't know how to network. So those are technical reasons which are there, but they are not the lion's share. Whereas if you see a lot of programs are geared towards catering to that 20%, and which is also helpful, but the lion's share is, getting the strategy right, as per at least our survey. So one is doing those extensive surveys. The other thing is our work itself, right? So Bridgespan, being present in US, Africa, Singapore, India, we have kind of worked with around 1,000 nonprofits in the last decade or so. And that is also a very useful experience to understand, okay, what are the challenges that nonprofits are dealing with? what kind of is top of their mind and how are things changing. So for example, something like monetization, corpus building was not on top of the mind in today. It is top of mind for many non-profits, right? So those things, again, it's not static, things change, but so while there's a common foundation, there are new things which get added, right? So keeping a pulse on that. Third and very important is our base of BNDP LM. So BNDP is the Bridgespan non-profit development program that we run. And we have some 120 odd alums. And that alum list itself is kind of, talking to them and engaging with them gives us good amount of perspective. Lastly, I would say is our knowledge thing, right? So when we do different knowledge pieces, so for example, way back in 2017, we did a piece on building the bench for the Indian non-profit sector that actually spoke about developing second line of leadership, right? Or about transformative scale way back in 2014, which talked about how to scale where growth matters. So those kind of knowledge work as well give us a good insight into the mindset of non-profit leaders and teams as well. So I think all of this combined, there is no one straitjacket instrument, but it's a mix of everything that allows us to kind of do it, right? So while BNDP caters to strategy and talent needs, that's where our investment thesis is that if we help non-profits around strategy and talent development, it can help unlock their potential. We also then come up with separate programs where we feel the need is very strong. So for example, now there are a lot of non-profits who are thinking about systems thinking. So how can we help them around systems? There are a lot of non-profits who are thinking about DEI goals and applying DEI lens in their strategy. So those are additional areas that we covered through BNDP as well. So the idea is to keep on having a tab and a check in terms of what the non-profit sector really needs. So that's on the assessment side of things. If I may, on this entire thing about, what are the key design elements, at least that has worked for us, so that we considered, right? So BNDP is more like a 3-year-old or almost 3.5-year-old product or a service, right? In some ways, and we started in COVID. But before that, almost for a year and a half, we kind of assessed, what are the different capacity building programs? What do non-profits require? Why do some capacity building programs work? Why do some doesn't work? And we stumbled onto some very interesting thing that we have baked into BNDP, right? First and foremost, what we realize is that while we are thinking about capacity building programs to bring about transformative change, that change is in a way dependent on only that one person who's attending that program, right? So then we expect that one person to go back to transmit everything and to create miracles. Now that can be helpful if you're doing something on best practices kind of thing, right? What are the best practices for regulatory things? What are the best practices for finance? But if you're doing something tangible as designing your strategy or developing a second line of leadership, you need a team to participate. So one thing that I am a firm personal believer is that you need a 5-7 member team to participate in the capacity building program together. So the burden of transformation is not just on one person or one individual. It is shared. So the CEO participates and then other 5 to 7 members also participate, right? And this also brings this interesting fact that I think Priya highlighted a bit, that what we also saw is that in every organization, we had those 1 or 2 people who would attend bulk of trainings or programs or, such things. And then the rest would be very underexposed. So how do you create a program where almost 7, 8 of them can come together? And in our case, like of 120 organizations, I can say most of them say this is the first program we are attending. Because up till now, we actually didn't get any opportunity to join any program. So the key aspect is how do you get a team so that your success also improves. So to give you one small example, we do this design strategy module, right, which is about designing your 3 to 5 years of strategy. After 12 months of doing that module, we check with the non-profit leaders that how many of you were able to execute the strategy.
Mhm.
And the answer is almost 87% of them said we were able to execute our strategy. And believe me, I'll let out a trade secret that's higher than what we get on consulting also. And the reason is because the entire team was involved from day one. There was ownership and alignment. there were sometimes board members as part of the team. So there was no need to say, okay, after my strategy is done, now let's go and ask so and so, or let's kind of build alignment with so and so internally. It was all done and dusted when the strategy was in place after 4 months, the module. So those are some of the very credible benefits of working with teams and not just individuals, right? So that's, I think, one. The second thing is what we thought is while we do it in a cohort-based form, what is very important is to give them that personalized coaching experience, right? Because the non-profits in India, globally as well, but in India, they are quite diverse. We have non-profits like which are ultra small to ultra big to working in different sectors and all of that. Now, if you are developing a cohort of, let's say, 20 non-profits per se, everyone would be different. So how can we deliver an experience where a coach is mapped to them throughout that 4 month period? So it was not about to say, somewhere
Yeah.
very.
मालूम नहीं किधर है उधर.
Sorry.
No,
Yes,
no.
Kashyap.
So very candidly, the easier route is that, okay, let's call 10 mentors in, let's call 5 experts in, and they will come in and talk on their topics that they are experts on, and which is helpful. But I think it has this limitation. You can't cater to the personalized needs of a non-profit without dedicated coaching. So that's another element I would say, right? One is working with teams. Second is this personalized coaching. And what that does is it allows us to cater to make your program very universal. So if you look at our 120 alums, or if you look at any cohort of ours, you will find a non-profit which is 20-25 lakh operating budget, and you will find a non-profit which is 400-500 crore operating budget. You will find a non-profit working in climate to education. You will find someone working in Sukma and the tribal belts and so on and so forth. So if you want to make your L&D program universal and somewhere where you can appeal to a larger or add value rather to larger set of non-profits, I think personalized coaching is the way to go, right? The third element is what we also saw is that somewhere there were two choices, right? To design a program in a way where you focus more on best practices, but not the tangible outcomes, right? So in a way, like if you're talking about strategy or talent, okay, what are the best ways to keep in mind while designing a strategy? What are the things to do while thinking about second line of leadership? And again, that has its own limitation. The idea was to design it in a way that actually, if a non-profit signs up for a designing strategy module, they're actually doing their strategy in that 4 months. So at the end of 4 months, they have a strategy in place. If they're signing up for a second line of leadership module, then actually after end of 4 months, they have a talent development plan for each of their team members and their direct reports. So how do you ensure that the modules have tangible outcome? So you use those best practices, you use those frameworks and all of that, but you ensure that there is something very tangible coming out of each of the module and not just, best practices or frameworks kind of thing. So that was the third. And fourth, and then I will pause. I know I've gone on a bit, but the fourth one is more about to say that somewhere there are different ingredients, talking about ingredients, there are different ingredients which are needed, right? So while peer interactions is important, at the same time, deep coaching is important. At the same time, getting hearing experts and mentors is important. So how do you design a module which has a more blended experience? So one other thing we were mindful of that we want to design something where first an individual within a team can experience and engage with a platform. So we have a tech platform in place for each of our modules. Second is then they engage within teams, within their own team, within the organization. And what you will be surprised to know is we have heard from organizations which are like 80-year-old organization, people working together for 20 years, saying that before this program, we have not interacted on such issues. It was always tactical, here and now. So how do you give them time to come together, step back and think of these, sticky issues? And then, then of course the coach conversation. So we have almost 350 to 400 minutes of coaching per non-profits in that 4 month time frame, and followed up by, getting in experts in plenary events and workshops and so on and so forth. So how do you create that right blend where you do a bit of everything, but in a measure which will kind of not be distracting, but enabling? So I think that I would say are some of the key elements that has worked for us as BNDP. and which we feel are helpful from a L&D context as well.
Thanks so much, Kashyap. And no, I think you addressed everything that we spoke about, and so thank you for that. I'd just like to summarize and then, of course, bring Kavneet in here too. So, for all the nonprofits or from the donor community who's present here today, what we would like you to take away from this is definitely how do you prioritize L&D within your organization, right? So, one is definitely don't, if you're a leader, don't view this as just you have to go get a training, prioritize it within your organization for all levels of your teams to get that exposure. The second thing that I would take from what Kashyap was saying is don't look at it as a theory sort of sort of training that you need to do, or what Priya was saying, it can happen in different ways. So coaching is an important way, so view it as someone there to support you, but the journey is yours. And again, like Kashyap said, if you participate in L&D programs like this, you will be able to prioritize them if you have tangible results at the end of it, that I'm doing this program and I will be able to, have coherence in my strategy. So I just wanted to put that out there that, it's not just about how you will design programs, but it's also as a user, as a learner, how you should look at, learning and development in the sector. So I would like to ask Kavneet to also build a little more on this. Kavneet, when you have been working, and Priya also said for several decades now, right, looking at the learning and development space. So, what do you, in your opinion, how has Dasra gone about, identifying needs, working with organizations, and what do you think has led or not led to certain levels of impact at the three levels we are speaking about?
Yeah, thank you, Sharon. And first of all, it's such a pleasure to be here and part of this conversation. Always, it's always good to hear from Priya, and she has been. I think my first year was when Priya and some of her peers from the sector had come in for the first leadership program. And like always, we were very open to tell us what we can do, what is the feedback, how should we change, and by the end of the day, we were like, okay, we're too overwhelmed with the feedback. So now let's pause. Let's take a break. But I think what Kashyap was referring to and what Priya said as well, I think for us, it's very important to have the user's voice as we design or as we think of any of the L&D programs for the space. I mean, we've been lucky to hold these programs since 2006. And today, Dasra, with all the humility, we have that privilege to understand different perspectives. So one, of course, we work with nonprofits on other programs, our other collaborators as well. So we do have a pulse of how the sector is feeling, what are the challenges that nonprofit leaders are facing at a particular moment, but also working with funders, donors, we have the opportunity to, help them understand the why of capacity building. So I think it's a little bit of the position that Dasra holds, with which we also have the responsibility to ensure that different perspectives are kept into mind as we design these programs, but also, kind of use this as an opportunity to then bring a little bit of that influence amongst the different stakeholder groups. I think before I dive into the cohort engagement programs, as Dasra started, we also, ran the giving circles for 13 years. And these giving circles primarily brought, a group of funders together to kind of form a kitty and select a nonprofit that they would invest in. And one of I think one of the caveats, or one of the only caveats that we had from our end, was that this is not going to be alone funding support to organization, but there is going to be 100 days capacity building, hands-on capacity building support to the organizations. So I think it's a little bit for owners with each one of us, also to, not, create silos between the impact and capacity building, not create silos between either give us funds for, implementing this program for the next 3 years, but kind of weave in together both the aspects. So I think I would like to start by saying that the ownership lies with each one of us, whatever, stakeholder archetype we may come from, we may represent. I think since then we've run multiple cohorts of leadership program, but also another program which is called the Accelerator Program. And I see few faces, familiar names here, not faces, who've been part of both these programs. And the Accelerator Program was more hands-on to support organizations think about what Kashyap was saying around strategy building. How do you actually, by the end of the program, have a fundraising plan ready so that you are out there? You also do a pitch practice by the end of the program, so you have a sense of what next is going to happen once you have been through a program. But on the other hand, the leadership program was started again because of the feedback we received from the alumni, saying that while we now understand our strategy, we've got some tips on how to fundraise, we are trying to strengthen stakeholder engagement, but where the sector is lacking is not having enough platforms to share openly what a leader is going through. Hence, the leadership program, was initiated in 2013, when we said, okay, now this is more of like a platform where we give all the leaders a safe space to just exchange learnings and learn from each other, which today has grown to, a 600 alumni, network of leaders, primarily CXOs and founders, who now have come back to us, asking to build capacities beyond, to the next level. And like Priya said, and that's the reason that this year it was a conscious decision with support from A.T.E, Chandra Foundation, that we are going to now not focus anymore on CXOs and founders, but rather the focus has to be on building the second in line. And something I think which we're also realizing is the middle management. I think that again, is the backbone of any organization. So as you think of the senior most leadership, you think of second in line, we also need to think of the mid management, or the first time managers, if I have to simplify and call that out. And I think there's a huge gap right now. Sharon, I don't know if you wanted me to cover the gap, but that is one thing I wanted to call out that we also need to start working on. I think one more thing that I wanted to put forth on how we assess the gap, learning gaps in the sector, is also through, it's a bit of a collaborative approach that we've always taken. So if you look at the program, curriculum, the facilitators are not only from Dasra. It's a platform approach. So we invite, and till date, we would have had engaged with close to 30 or more different organizations, different experts who come in and facilitate sessions, and hence bring the knowledge and expertise of the gaps that we would have overlooked. So, it's also going beyond our existing circle of alumni and understanding what some of the gaps that we would have missed through these experts. And likewise, we always are eager to offer whatever expertise we have to other programs and go as speakers, as facilitators, and share some of our experiences, some sessions that we have been doing well for our programs. Can we replicate those for other programs? So I think that way there's a lot of cross learning and also understanding what are the sector needs beyond our own existing network of say 700 to 1,000 nonprofits. And I think the final thing that I also want to share is that there is, I know Priya said this, and I don't know if many of you would agree or disagree with me on this, but I think there is merit to look beyond our space, beyond our development sector, whether it's corporates, whether it's beyond India, right? To look at institutes like Harvard Business School, Stanford, some of the others, and pick what has worked for them and replicate some of that to our sector. And we've tried using this approach where we've tried to bring the Harvard case study methodology to the development space, and we've seen some success with that. And I'm not saying it's a one fit all solution. Definitely we need customization, and like Priya mentioned, with A.T.E. Chandra support, SNMI was launched, right, which also gave the sector an opportunity to have a series of cases, Harvard cases, written on Indian nonprofits, which did not exist earlier. So today we have also, cases available, um, written by these, brilliant professors on Indian NGOs that we can use as examples to replicate and learn from. But I think one of the approaches that also have worked for us, and big kudos to the alumni and their commitment to the sector and not just their own organization, is them giving back to these programs. So I've had Priya so many times come back, to the next cohorts and share her experiences. And I think that to me stands out because we've also been able to build a lot of material content from the Indian development space with this. So, because when we got so much feedback from Priya and her peers, we started building these, small caselets, which are from the cohort itself. So you pick an NGO from the cohort, you pick a dilemma that they today are struggling with or would have struggled with, and then you kind of use that case to have conversations in the group. So I think their commitment to the sector is also something that we leverage to understand the learning gaps.
Yes. Thanks so much, Kavneet. And just want to again, just summarize two things that I mean, all of what you said makes so much sense, but two things. One is also for those who are attending today, there is a lot of, literature, case studies, things that have already taken place. You're not alone in, the struggles that you face. So I think looking beyond just your organization to see what exists and who is there to support you. And I think the second piece that I 100% agree with, and that's how we've shaped the study also, that learning and development should not just be viewed as something that happens to you and you learn as a professional, but it should translate into, the organization being strengthened. And most importantly, when you give back, the sector kind of learns so much more. So, definitely looking at impacts of these at a professional level, at an organizational strengthening level, and then, what happens at a sectoral level. So thank you so much for that, Kavneet. And I think I'd like to now call upon Gayatri to basically address two pressing questions. So we recognize in this short time, I don't know how much justice we've done, but what we're saying is learning and development is crucial. It's important. But like Kashyap said, it's good to have, but not urgent. So my first question is, what is your advice to organizations and how should they go about prioritizing, learning and development within their organizations? And also, how do they overcome these, how should we overcome these barriers of resource constraints, of, not the right people in the room? So yes, Gayatri.
Sure. First, I just want to address the urgency versus importance statement. I think in certain cases, it can also be quite urgent. Typically, we look at building somebody's skills when they're not performing. But if you actually turn that on its head and look at the high-performing people, infuse them with the right learning and development opportunities, what they can do is massive. So it's almost at the opportunity cost that we're missing out on in terms of developing someone. When I joined the sector and I was in the role of fundraising, I thought I was really good. Like Priya said, transferable skills from corporate. I thought I've sold projects. This should be easy. And I really struggled. And in 3 months, I thought I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. And was very humbled very quickly. But I was at Teach for India then, and somebody from Teach for All sat and coached me and taught me how to write a proposal, what each slide of mine was actually conveying versus what I was saying. And that to me was transformational. And that's, I think, what we're trying to do for everybody in the sector through our learning and development work. It is hard to prioritize, though. I want to give Kashyap credit for what he said. It is hard to prioritize with every other expense that you have to pay out. And I know somebody put in the chat as well, right? These programs are so expensive. How do small organizations benefit from this? We've actually started funding certain providers of learning and development support who actually address small organizations. Now, it won't be as hands-on as a Bridgespan or a Dasra would do, but it's because they also have to be able to meet their costs. But it's more like more larger cohorts, but at an affordable cost. So there are options in the market for all sizes of organizations and all types of programs. One of the things that we're trying to do, as Sharon mentioned, is actually understand what gaps currently still exist. What has been the impact of learning and development on each of you, on your organizations, on what you think it's actually done for the sector. And while all of you have very excitedly shared your email addresses, sorry, Sharon, I started that whole chain. But to get the tool that Priya mentioned, I'd also urge that you fill out the survey so we also understand what's actually helping, what's not. So as a donor, we can double down on what's working. We can address gaps that don't exist. But I think to the question Sharon asked me right at the beginning, which I will now get to, we need to take this to other donors as well. So as you struggle to raise funds for being able to to build the capacities of your team members, give us the opportunity or give us the role almost to evangelize this idea of learning and development. That's why we're asking you for data. That's why we keep harassing Kavneet and Kashyap and the likes to say, what should we be doing, and how should we be looking at this? Have you thought about this? Priya, to your point, I think you were the one who first mentioned to me there's nothing happening for the second in line. That's when we started this conversation with others, like, hey, we need to start strengthening. It can't just be about the CXO level. So, we learn from our partners. We harass the hell out of our learning and development partners, but we also then take that back to donors saying, you guys also need to be doing this. So that's really where I think our role as donors can be, to push more and more people to be funding this, and not to actually think of it as outside of regular. This should become standard practice. This should become urgent and important.
And Gayatri, would you also like to talk a little bit about, what we were discussing, that how do you manage for, how do you integrate these costs? Because I saw one question also, right? Do you know of any funders who look at L&D? And you made a very important point, right? Like, it's not external, it's not something. So could you talk a little bit about that? Like, how should organizations start integrating this into their costs? And, your point on that would be very helpful.
Yes, absolutely. So I don't, and again, we do think a little differently, but I think what I would like is for all donors to not think of this as additional costs, as non-programmatic costs. Like if I'm building the capacity of a program manager, why should it be an HR cost? It's a program management cost. So I think even when we explain this to donors to get funding for, say you're getting funding for M&E and your M&E head needs to go for training, that should be part of your M&E costs. A lot of them will push back, of course, but I think the more of us who speak that language and do it consistently, the more it's going to become the norm than the exception.
Absolutely. And I think that's so relevant, right? Like, we shouldn't say, and just to give you an example, and I don't know if I'll do justice to how you put it yesterday, Gayatri, but if you're saying that a per person cost is 11,000, then add the 2,000, saying that you don't need to explicitly say it's L&D, but the person cost should become, say, 13,000, because that's how it works in corporate practice.
So, yeah, sorry, that's correct. I remember the point now. But when I know in my previous life, the CTC would include my training cost, but in nonprofits we don't do that. Training is separate, and your salary costs are separate. And I know of funders who will fund line item wise, right? And they'll say, no, sorry, Priya's salary is X, I'll pay X. Actually, I'll pay 1/3 of X, and you get 2/3 from somewhere else. right? So how does that 1/3 actually, the denominator actually become bigger by including your L&D costs as well? That's what I'm trying to say. Like that needs, like if the same donors paying that in their companies, then why not with the nonprofits? So let's just start using that language and make that the norm.
Absolutely. Yes. And just to also conclude, and then I know there are lots of questions, so I'll look at the chat box and see which ones we would like to address and then call you all in. But just want to conclude with, just from what Gayatri said, why we are doing the study is exactly that. One is to demonstrate that this has an impact, to learn about needs, and to most importantly, educate the sector. Like, someone asked a question, how do we convince our leadership, or how do we convince our donors? So that's the power of data, and that's the power of what we're trying to do, bring people together to recognize, yes, this is important, and how do we now work towards changing the narrative on the importance or urgency of learning and development. So yes, I would. I've not had a chance to read the chat box yet, but I'm just going to quickly pick up a few questions on this. Or
Kashyap has his hand up already.
Oh yes, Kashyap, please.
Yeah, no, I think just wanted to add to what Gayatri said, and since you were at that point, I think a bit of a provocative thought, but I believe that a lot of us think of capacity building as training. And I've been in many conversations where they say, oh, we have budget for training, and that budget is 3,000 rupees of TADA that we have. Now how can we manage in that budget, right? So I'm basically myself, there have been times where we have described BNDP as a program, sometimes as training. It's proliferated word. But I think the training mindset means that you keep some allowance for people to travel for a day somewhere, do that training and come back. And that's what organizations are budgeting for. Like if you do a 4-month accelerated program in Harvard, would you call that training? We would not call that training, right? So somewhere a lot of the programs like Kavneet or BND, Bridgespan, Dasra, others, they are like intense capacity building programs. But when they're classified as trainings, that's where the budgeting line item issues also start. So that's a bit of a personal anecdote that I wanted to share here.
No, absolutely. Thanks so much, Kashyap. I just see through the chat, skimming through it. Parul, you have quite a few different questions. Do you want to come in and ask the panelists and the speakers about your couple of questions, very interesting ones? Are you here, Parul?
Hi, Sharon. Yes, I am here. Thanks, everyone. I mean, thanks, Sharon, for this, session, and to the panel. It's been very interesting perspectives. So, a couple of thoughts that come to mind. One is, on the other side, like on the academic side, given that, some of the institutions are new as well, like ISDM, and then some of the schools of development that are also coming up, like at, say, APU. I wonder what the panel thinks about, how best might some of these academic institutions and the impact sector, work together towards, L&D being strengthened for the sector.
Priya, would you like to take it, or Gayatri, or Kavneet, anyone?
Yeah, I can take it, and then I'll request others to add in. So Parul, no, I think that's a great question, and from my own experience of running these programs over a decade, I feel that each stakeholder has a role to play, right? So of course, the donors bring in the resources, they also bring in their perspectives, the gaps that they see. The nonprofits are there as the implementers. I think think tanks and academia both have a great role to play. If we have to, number one, look at curriculum development, right? For example, the programs that we do, there has been partnership with Harvard Business School, right? With Harvard professors to build certain case studies. There also has been collaboration and partnership. For example, Ashoka University, A.T.E, Chandra and Dasra did come together when SNMI was launched at Ashoka University, right? So Academy again had a big role to play in terms of bringing in their perspectives of the curriculum, the theory piece of it. I think in my opinion, there has to be a balance to it, right? Because if we purely look at academia, it may just become more of theory versus, when you have practitioners coming into these, L&D programs, that time they come in with very real life, practical problems, and they love the frameworks and they love the tools, but then they're like, can I go back and apply this to the problem of how do I delegate better in my team, right? Or how do I build that ownership in my team? So I think if we're leaving them and we're able to bridge that gap between, converting the theoretical frameworks, tools, and make it applicable and customize it to the specific, sector that we are in, then it's a fabulous. But I think we need them. It can't be without them. But I'll let others on the panel add.
I can jump in quickly. ISTM, for example, I know one of their key focus areas is capacity building. So they're going to be doing, for the second year in a row, the development and dialogues and development management focused on capacity building of individuals and the sector. Similarly, they have short programs. So, as a funder, we are agnostic in terms of who is conducting it, whether academia or consulting firms or others. For us, it's the content, it's who it's being delivered to and how it's being delivered that matters most.
Thank you. Kashyap, there's something which is quite interesting here from Ankita on team participation and getting leaders, second line leadership. Can I have Ankita come in here?
Hi, Sharon. Thanks for that. So firstly, thanks for organizing this, and as well as thanks for such an interesting conversation to the speakers. Really resonated with a lot that Kashyap said. And I wanted to understand a little bit around when you talk about team participation, leadership's motivation and drive to actually learn and grow is very different from second line and middle management. So do we have any research or any, suggestions in terms of how do we work around that?
Thanks, Ankita. And I think with that, I would also address, I think, a question raised by Priya as well, right? On similar lines, like how do you engage, or if they're all at different levels of exposure, how do you kind of manage that? So I think that's honestly, that was top of our mind when we added that as a design element, right? Like we thought that would it be a case where we are doing a module, let's say on strategy or on second line of leadership, and most of our time is in this distraction of managing team dynamics and, trying to justify everyone's presence. But honestly, we have done 10 cohorts, 120 non-profits, kind of participating in them, in all of that. But I think in no single organization has any issues on this lines cropped up. And I think when we did a kind of a post-mortem in terms of why, I think there are 2-3 solid reasons, right? So one is the way we design the team structure. So first of all, we most of the time the CEOs are very keen to get the team in, because the CEOs feel I should not have the burden myself. The team is excited because, as I said, a lot of them are underexposed to any such program. So they feel this will be an opportunity to kind of work on something more strategic. So that in terms of captures the aspiration part of it. The second is each team which participates, we divide them into the fact that there's a CEO, and then the CEO selects a project lead within the team. And the project lead is a facilitator within that team, right? So the CEO's voice, we ensure that the CEO's voice comes in, but that comes in the last. It does not dominate the voice of other members. And the project lead has a separate curriculum that we share, and we support the project lead to ensure that the voice of each and every individual kind of comes in. The third aspect is that the tech platform allows each member to kind of individually engage with the platform and get up to speed with things. And these are multilingual platform, right? So it's at least, bilingual, I would say, English and Hindi both. So individuals or team members, they actually come in very prepared during these team discussions, and they're able to contribute. They understand concepts, they understand what they are talking about. When they are talking about theory of change, let's say, they know what are the key strategic approaches, linkages, and all of that. So I think that has kind of helped. And the fourth aspect is, I think we have had a lot of times CEOs, when they participate, they ask us, so who from our team should join? And we said there is no cookie cutter answer to it. we have seen organizations bring in their finance folks, partnership head, program heads, tech heads, board members sometimes. So whoever you feel will carry on this work or would be accountable for this work should definitely be there. Sometimes organizations have used this to orient new members who have joined the firm, right? New senior leaders. So they ask them to join it as well. So in fact, it works in many different ways than what we think in some ways. So for us, the experience has been on the contrary, where there has not been a thing like, oh, a person is not willing to participate, or the voice of other people is not heard or something. In fact, they have a lot to say. And our humble thought process is that they know more than us. The idea is, how do you get them to share their knowledge in a right way? And this program gives them an opportunity to share their thoughts, because it's not that we are building their strategy. They are building their strategy. We are just coaching them. And that's what has, I think, served us well, because we feel they have the answers. They just need that support toolkit, that time to come together and then kind of share their thoughts. So that's, I think, what has worked.
Sorry. Kavneet, do you want to come in as to, especially with the second line leadership and anything that you would like to add to what Kashyap said?
Yeah. I think one thing that I would want to say is that at an organization level, there is a need to build a culture of learning. And that needs to trickle down, from the top to the bottom. And in my experience, it begins by leadership committing and not feeling guilty to invest in their own growth, and hence setting a kind of a example or a role model for others in the team. And when you're on a training, how often are you also on your phone checking emails and responding to emails? When you are in a training for 3 days, can you just pause, reflect, and do what you're supposed to do with the L&D, right? And not worry about what's happening back home. And nobody should worry about that. Nobody should bother you with that, right? So I think that culture of learning, if that starts building right in the organization, automatically a lot of things around building second in line, how do you build capacity at middle management, all of those becomes your priority, and the urgency comes in.
Sure. Thank you. And I think very important question, and I think Amita is here too. Amita, we were also looking at programs and like implementation teams, right? What we've spoken about leadership, second line leadership, managers. And Gayatri, you have a very interesting question on, field associate, field managers, who are actually the heartbeat of our organizations, right? So Gayatri, you want to come and ask your question and maybe direct it to a speaker so it's easier.
Yes, I'm here, Sharon, and thank you. I'm trying to get my video on. Hello. Yes, I think this is something that I've faced personally, and each time we work with somebody and get them to a point, but somehow there is a stickiness there and doesn't move forward, right? So here we have, Bridgespan, we have Gayatri's team, and we have Dasra and all of them working at the top. But I find a lot of energy is needed, and I'm not saying it's like unwarranted. It is necessary, and I dig back and say, what did you learn in your MSW course? Okay, so what happened? I feel somehow that we have, as a community of change makers and growth enthusiasts, if you want to say, we have actually not looked at that aspect. What is happening in the smaller, tiny town MSW course? It is, in many ways, we need people who are from the local, who understand the cultures. And India is a country of 1 million cultures. So each 150 kilometers we move, things change. So we need them. But what are we doing for them to become successful in their career? And we all know that we have to design success. It is given in organization, and coming from Harvard and coming from all the different management institutions. But how are we designing success for this young person who's chosen MSW? It's a harsh career. I mean, we expect them to go. There are no buses. one bus in the morning, one bus in the evening. There is no toilets and food. Everything is a challenge. But at the end of the day, how are we setting them up for success? And MSW is not helping. Where the curriculum is, it's not helping. The way the education system is today, it's not helping, because we know how an average college works. This is probably some of the lot of heart and not much action, and that's a good way of putting it. And not just hard skills that there are. So how do we as an ecosystem kind of go and say, okay, because that's where we need our future managers to come from. It's not, and yes, there is space for and I like to call it Western educated, so don't mistake me for it, but there is that as well. We need a lot of people who have grassroots experience to come, grassroots lives to come into the space and come up as leadership.
Thank you
And
for
there's a
that,
gap.
Gayatri.
There's a
Yes,
gap.
thank you. Sorry. Thank you so much for that, because there are a couple of things that come to mind, like even in our team at Fourth Wheel. So we have a lot of people who come in from the Gandhi Fellowship, from, the different fellowship programs, like right off after your, MSW or something like that. So I hear you. And I think those that come out of those fellowships show considerable amount of resilience, leadership. There's a lot. I can clearly tell, differences between these things. So I 100% hear you and would definitely like the speakers to come in. But I would also like to add to your point and hear from the speakers on this that, yes, when you're doing a MSW, it's like any other course, right? What do you need when you're practically working? So say from an M&E perspective, how do you do strategy? How do you build indicators? How do you collect data? How do you use that? How do you work with teams? So many functional skills which get lost in the theoretical exams for our complex sector, right? So
Yes.
I 100% agree with you and would love to hear from, Priya, Kavneet, Kashyap, Gayatri. What do you all feel about this?
I can come in and then would love to hear Gayatri, Kavneet, and Kashyap as well. So I think Gayatri, what she's brought up, Rapti has put down a similar question. It's truly a challenge, right? Because we know that, so if I can break this to, sort of Gayatri's question and points as well, if I can break it into two, there is the actual hard skills that need to be built across the board. That's the easier part, right? And I feel that there are many, like Kavneet has mentioned, there are many of these workshops and programs to build some of these harder skills over there. The second is building perspective, which is the more transferable skill that we're talking about. My own experience in the sector over the last, 2+ decades has been that it's not that, our teams don't have that perspective or don't have that ability. But I do believe that it at some level, the politics of language and articulation comes in here, right?
Yes.
And that becomes one of the biggest stumbling blocks. If we can figure a way to crowdsource these perspectives and put them into the same frameworks that say, the more articulate, what Gayatri mentioned as Western, or, the corporate way of doing things can be. And I feel that will be a huge sort of service almost to the sector that we only as practitioners can bring. And I believe that, that the intelligence for it needs to come from all of us. And then, someone like a Kashyap can help us put those into frameworks that we then start adopting a lot more. And the minute those frameworks are in place and, we sort of give voice and mainstream these perspectives, then automatically the people from whom these perspectives are coming from, which is, all our team members, because they're doing the hard work really on the ground, they automatically come up to prominence. It's something that I know like a few of us have been talking about, but not, it's again this urgent, important, and what is prioritized becomes the issue. But I feel that could be one, something that we all could do collaboratively almost.
Thank you, Priya. Would Gayatri, Kashyap, Kavneet, anyone like to add to this, or?
I think one thing I would like to comment, or I mean, I completely agree, Gayatri, with what you said, right? And I feel there are no easy answers to this. So I don't honestly have a magic bullet or a panacea for this. But just couple of observations, right? One is, I think we as a non-profit sector should ask ourselves that are we equally charged about professional development? Are we investing enough on professional development, right? We work with so many non-profits, not most, but many of them don't even have a proper review system in place, right? They still go with some KRAs or so it's more about, okay, we are doing good work and this is the money we have, so let's continue. So one is our mindset with regards to professional development, which needs to improve. I'll tell you this one thing, right? And I have no shame in telling it to the larger audience. Our module on developing second line of leadership is actually for entire organization. But we name it second line of leadership because that's where we get interest. If I say develop talent for your organization, most CEOs will say, oh, we have this, we have that. But when I say second line of leadership, then the CEOs think, okay, I need support in my work and I need a strong second line. But actually, in our module, we work with the third line, fourth line, fifth line as well, and they all need to focus and get their talent development and competencies in. But having said that, that's a very minor example. But effectively, working on professional development is very important. And I think what we are trying to do is, and thanks to Amit Chandra for his nudge, is what's the ROI for such programs, right? Because it's only ROI which will justify investment. So if you have gone through a Bridgespan BNDP program or some other program, what's the ROI at the end of the day? And once that is socialized, then there will be more funders coming in and they will feel that, okay, there is a bang for the buck, there is leverage here. So I think that's one side of it. The other side of it is also at an org level. So what we are seeing as a trend, right? And I don't have numbers to back this up, but this is a very strong phenomenon that we are witnessing, is the big non-profits are getting bigger and the smaller are starving for whatever reasons, right? I mentioned regulatory cholesterol being one, and there are other reasons also. So then, how do you ensure these grassroots organizations get equal benefit of capacity building? Now, again, I'll tell you our story. When we go to funders, they're willing to fund for their partners. And their partners are those big and small non-profits, not the grassroots ones. If I have to service the grassroots ones, I need core funding to support them. But that is not available. It's very difficult to talk about core funding vis-a-vis capacity development and all that. So basically, grassroots organizations are not getting that kind of support. And of course, they're not in a position to pay for it. So there are some of these structural issues, I would say, which actually is kind of further amplifying this sentiment. But completely agree to your point.
Thanks, Kashyap. Kavneet, do you want to come in here?
Yeah. So, I think I will not repeat. I agree with what Kashyap was saying, Gayatri, and fully in agreement to what you were saying. But I just wanted to present very quickly, two examples, that uh, s- are aiming to solve for some of this. One, I think, if you haven't read about the Rebuild India Fund, that was launched as a relief initiative during the second wave of COVID, is now growing, as a program that supports only grassroots leaders and their organizations. And the idea is to provide them unrestricted funding, along with that, hands-on capacity building support. And during this, it was very hard for us as an organization, but we've realized what some of you have mentioned on the group, that we cannot deliver these programs in English. So now at Dasra, we've kind of developed translators. These programs are developed in Hindi. They're also translated in other regional languages, whether it's Kannada or a few others, to then ensure that the leaders or their team members from these smaller grassroots organizations can actually benefit from the programming that we are offering them. So that's one example. The other thing I wanted to quickly say is that, and Jishnu is here, Goalkeep is one of our knowledge partners on this program, which is called the Data Catalyst program. And I know, Priya, two of your team members have also participated this time on this program. There are certain competencies that can easily be built and nurtured, in this cohort, I feel. And for example, data and tech is one of that, right? They come with that kind of experience, and then can we not bombard them with bigger frameworks and all the Harvard case studies, etc. But can we give them an environment where they can actually build on their own skill sets? If, for example, if it's an M&E, this program that I'm talking about is a program that brings two doers, not leaders, two doers from the organizations. The only caveat is that the organization should look at data as part of their strategy, and then support them through cohort programming plus mentorship to work on a problem statement that they would have identified. So by the end of this journey, they would definitely have solved for the data or the tech challenge, and would have got mentorship support. But in the process, they would have represented their organization in front of 30 more people and given an elevator pitch. They would have also represented their organization to the networking dinner and met maybe a couple of funders. So that exposure may look like smaller opportunities to us, but for them, it's a bigger opportunity in hand, and it kind of goes a long way. I just wanted to share and give those two quick examples. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Kavneet. Yes, I think we'll just take the last question and we can close this session. But Amrita, I would like to call you in. I think it's a good way to close. Like we're saying, prioritize it, reflect, let it kind of look at different layers of your organization, but then also there's external. And there was a very interesting question, and I would also like to bring that in here. Do you need an external consultant to identify L&D? Can it be done like that? It's quite interesting. So Amrita, you could ask your question, and this could be the last one, and speakers could respond to it. Amrita, are you here?
Yeah, hi. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, everybody, for the discussion. I think the discussion is what also inspired that question. I think just the idea that when we think of L&D and talk of L&D, it's always spoken of in this, there are external providers giving this service on specific domain areas. And who also come in, like Kashyap and the others were also saying, that it's the organization who ultimately knows what they're doing and what they're working on. And so I think more than provide more frameworks, I was thinking, are there ways in which we can facilitate organizations to also look at their practitioner knowledge? Because I think a huge part of organizations and practitioners is that they don't know what they know. Because they're so deeply entrenched in their practice. And so it's such a struggle to carve out those insights that they've gained over so many years of experience. So, and that also brings to this thing of, how do we build the knowledge that is more contextualized to this country that, Kavneet was also talking about in terms of, and Parul was talking about in terms of bringing more academia, supporting more case study building. Can organizations also build these case studies from their own experiences? And can L&D processes be about organizations learning from their own experiences, anchoring in their own reflection processes, rather than only rooting it in external people coming in? So does L&D also have to be, can be about setting up sustainable reflection processes within organizations that make us L&D consultants redundant after beyond a certain point of time?
I think Priya started with this thought that, learning and development is not just these training programs. So I do think everyone, if I can speak for the speakers, everyone does resonate with that thought that it's not something that, you do a training, but it's also how do you have that learning culture? I think Kashyap and Kavneet spoke about it, right? How do you have a learning culture within your organization for the space to do and to prioritize all of these aspects? But yes, would anyone like to respond or anything more on this?
I can try and answer what we are doing at the foundation, right? We can't just talk about L&D for our partners, but also, looking at it internally. So one is we looked at each person's, and Amita can add in here, but each person, how they've performed against their goals, what are the skills and knowledge and attitudes that they need to develop. All this we did individually, rolled it up, and we've actually, for the first time, taken it to an L&D consultant. So what's going to come out of this is for the entire organization, and I say entire, we're about 12, 13 of us, not that big, but it'll look at aspects of coaching, of programs such as this, of on the job, what are the skills that we can develop from our managers, from other peers within the organization. We also, every month, last Thursday of the month, bring in an external speaker to talk to the team. We identify within the team learning that we can share. So it could even just be a report that Amita has read that she found really interesting and presenting that back to the team. So that develops our internal knowledge as well. So this is a rough way that we are doing it, but we're, spending considerable amount of money now, even on our own L&D.
Would any Priya, Kashyap, any final words? Kavneet, would you like to come in? Any final words? Actually, it would be nice to hear how you all would conclude, or what, people who've stayed till this long, what should they take away? What should they do next? Could we end with some, insights on what next? What can we do at our in our professional lives and within our organizations? Kashyap, you want to go first?
Yeah, maybe I can go first and I can talk about one thing that we have not spoken so far. And we've spoken a lot about importance of L&D, or, the cost and the budget of it. But, in our experience, and I've been with, I think maybe in calls with 600, 700 organizations when I'm pitching about BNDP or we're just doing a fitment. And I think cost is one deterrent, but I think more than cost, the major deterrent is time. And that's what I would like to kind of share today with all of our non-profit organizations, that L&D requires time. And I think time is more precious than cost, and which I feel a lot of non-profits are not giving, right? To this question of, can the organizations do L&D on their own? Do they need consultants? I think consultants and the program, of course, they add value. And I would like to believe that consultants add value. But I think the point is, it is, creating that structured environment where everyone comes together and spends their time. Now, if you introspect, why do you need that? You need that because on a day-to-day basis, we are not spending that amount of time. And we are just focusing on our operations and what we need to do. You will be surprised to know that how many organizations don't step back regularly. And when I say regularly, they don't even step back once a year or once in 2 years per se. Right? It's more about, okay, now this I have to do this funder is asking for this project is doing like this, and so forth. So I think the key is, if L&D is given the time and if it's part of that culture, then organizations can do wonders on its own. And of course, there is a lot of support available as well. Like we see organizations who have done our design strategy module, right? So they do it, they take support of Bridgespan or the BNDP module, but when they have to do a program strategy, they're doing it on their own. They're not coming back to us for BNDP saying, okay, how do I design it? Because they have given enough time to understand the mechanics of it. So I would just focus a lot more on time and giving enough time to this.
Thanks, Kashyap. Gayatri, would you like to say a final few words?
Yeah, I think, and I might repeat some of what I'm saying, but I think I'm doing that because I think it's important. One is, don't look at L&D only for poor performers. L&D is needed across the organization. Put out a separate budget as part of your people costs. It could be 5%, it could be 7%, but include that in your budget at the get-go. So when you're raising funds, you know that this is the total budget I need to. L&D can't be if I get extra funds. And I think the final thing I would say is that share your learnings, share your pain points with all of us. We do want to work on how to make the sector better and bigger and more impactful. And for that, we need all of you to fill out surveys when we reach out, and especially the current one we're doing. We have big plans for it.
Thanks, Gayatri. Priya, would you like to come in?
Sure, I don't want to repeat anything, but I would just add, I guess, two more things. One is that L&D is everyone's job in the organization, and not just the talent and culture team or the HR team, or just the senior leadership. I think that's that marks. I believe that's one of the biggest markers of a learning organization, where everyone is equally involved. Second, I feel that in most organizations, a lot of our time, like Kashyap did mention, go in the operational stuff, or even the talent and cultures team goes into recruitment, because that's such a pressing need for all of us to have people on board. It's so nice to see our Antarang's entire talent and culture team on this call today. For us, we take L&D very seriously. It gives us a lot of joy more than anything. So the staff meetings, where we have two blocks in the staff meetings, which is Antarangi Talks and Simply Seco, which is, really sort of collating the knowledge of the organization itself and playing it back to the rest of us and learning from each other. So I think just making it joyful, making learning and development joyful within the organization and bringing back whatever everyone has learned just creates that excitement to grow and sort of move from one milestone to the other.
Thanks, Priya. Yes, Kavneet, final words from your side.
Yeah, no, I'll just keep it brief. But I think one key takeaway that I'm also taking for myself or from this conversation is that we need to be very clear between the link of creating impact and the investment in L&D. So I think that is what, to me, it's like if we are clear and we know the linkage, we're able to articulate and build a strong narrative around that with donors as well. I also feel that we've spoken a lot about what nonprofits and donors should do, but a little bit that I want to leave you all thinking, and I do see a lot of L&D consultants, intermediaries like Bridgespan and Dasra in this call, is the role that we need to play as L&D so-called experts. I think it's always good to go into the organization, give our thoughts and perspectives, and then leave them to figure it out. So it's always it's about you be there as the support, as a sounding board, but I think it's their decision, and it's for them to figure a way out. And we all are nonprofits are fabulous at that. But thank you, Sharon. This was really a very engaging conversation for me as well.
Thank you so much, everyone. Just like to close with, I have my two things too. So one, as Gayatri mentioned, we are at the last sort of days of our online survey, where we are trying to really learn from people and professionals who've been part of learning and development programs. So please do take our survey. I'm sure you've received a lot of emails from us, but a couple of weeks more for us to really get a good sense of that. So that's one. And two, I'd just like to close with something. We're doing these qualitative interviews with leadership, etc. And I read something very interesting yesterday about how do you, from a very, very articulate leader in the sector, who said your future is not your projects or your everyday, right? Or your projects are not your future. Your people are your future, right? So I think that's something that I would like to leave everyone with, that how do you really look after your people, because projects are going to happen, every day is going to happen, and how do you capacitate everyone for those projects actually to be better in the future? So yes, would like to thank everyone for your time. I'm sure most of you have been part of the survey. If you've not, please do fill it in. But have a great evening, everyone, and thank you so much for your time and support.